First and Last. First and Last on ESPN Radio and on the ESPN app.
It's First and Last. Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We're presented by Progressive Insurance. Callers join us via the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. And you can tweet the show on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed at ESPN Radio and at mgolic Jr. 57. Good to be back, guys. Got a bevy of takes just sitting in the hopper for everyone here. We're just going to pop them off. Been traveling around a bunch lately, and it's nice to come back and know that some things change, some things stay the same, and we still don't know where the hell LeBron James is going to go. But man, oh man, we have made it interesting now because people are starting to put pinks up for this. They're starting to put their name on the line for this in a way that I can kind of respect because you know what? Why not? You've got the time and the platform right now. You've got the name power to do it. And hell, it's Los Angeles. Why not make waves? Because that's what you got to do to be interesting in that town, especially in a sport capacity at this point. You're starting to actually get competition from the football teams in there. The Los Angeles Rams coming off a stellar 2017 season. Hell, the Chargers seem like a playoff team every year until we're inevitably faced with, Phillip Rivers down a score in the fourth quarter with the length of the field to go in under a minute to ultimately have their hearts ripped out multiple times during that season. And we had some Clippers free agent drama a few years ago that we may get to revisit depending on how you read the tea leaves based off this latest trade. We'll get to that, the betrayal of a father to a son. We'll see if the key card's still going to work for me to get into the Golic and Wingo studios soon. But anytime Magic Johnson says something in Los Angeles, feels like news. Magic Johnson, who taking over as the Lakers GM and starting to make those basketball decisions last year, it was him kind of fumbling his way through some of the tampering, which seemed insane that anyone in the NBA was talking about actually looking at tampering seriously. But this time, Magic Johnson, who is getting ready for the portion of his job he was brought in to do, has upped the ante a little bit. This is Magic Johnson talking about what he will do should the Lakers not land any of those marquee free agents he's been talking about.
Next summer, if nobody comes and I'm still sitting here like this, then it's a failure. But if you judge us on one summer, that's ridiculous. Then a lot of dudes shouldn't be in their roles. I mean, because if we're banking on one summer for the Lakers, we're in trouble, right? We're in trouble because you have to give us time. This class, like I told you before I took the job and when I took the job, it's going to be a 2-summer thing for the Lakers. This summer and next summer. And that's it. And then if I can't deliver, I'm going to step down myself. She won't have to fire me. I'll step away from it, because then I can't do this job.
First and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app, that her being Jeannie Buss, his boss in this situation, and Magic making no bones about it. This is what his name, his presence was supposed to do, but it's also acknowledging, interestingly enough, and I'm sure we're going to overread into this comment a million different ways if we can, but you read into that and say it's about the next 2 summers. We understand there's a lot of marquee free agents going into next summer, but really when we look at free agency, and I understand people's frustration with the constant LeBron watch. I understand people's frustration that it seems like this guy alone is beat into the ground as far as a headline. But the reason that it is because really when you look at free agency for the next couple of years, there are only 1 or 2 guys that are actual league-altering forces. The way we look at the league presently constructed, with the Golden State Warriors and how dominant they've been, and with the Houston Rockets right maybe next in line in tow, there are really only 1 or 2 either moves or players who in and of themselves can shift the league in a way that puts a dent in that. And so for all of us that are looking to say, well, who's going to knock off Golden State, there's a reason we work our way back from the names like LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, and then everybody else. And the everybody else kind of comprises next summer unless Kawhi Leonard can't force a trade. And that's why this gets interesting, because we know there are a bunch of dominoes left to fall. Now, helping us parse through the rest of what Magic Johnson said, Kurt Sandoval of ABC 7 in Los Angeles joined Freddie and Fitzsimmons last night and basically played the tea leaf reader for us with Magic Johnson's comments.
When he makes that comment, here's what he means by that. They're all in on hoping to get Paul George and LeBron James this summer. But LeBron could sign a one-year deal, and it could be about next summer. What most people think that means, myself included, is if they don't land LeBron, there's a lot of free agents out there next summer. Kawhi Leonard, if he doesn't get a trade, is a free agent after next summer. Klay Thompson, who went to Santa Margarita High School out here, and obviously Klay's father is part of the Lakers organization. Those two guys, and just the future development of Kyle Kuzma and Lonzo Ball and their draft picks, are they a contender? I don't think so in the West, but they're a playoff team for sure.
First and last, I'm Mike Golic Jr. 30 for 30 podcasts have returned. Subscribe to 30 for 30 podcasts right now in the Listen tab of the ESPN app or Apple Podcast, brought to you by Delta, where it's our goal to connect your life in the air to your life on the ground. And that insistence on next summer is the one that becomes intriguing because, yes, those other names that he mentioned are compelling names. They are great all-star caliber players in the NBA, but it all really hinges on what happens with Kawhi. What happens with Kawhi Leonard, and does the prospect of the Spurs playing hardball with a situation where the little power that they have left is this ability to control where Kawhi lands? And it seems like what we hear is this lack of a desire to have him wind up, A, in the Western Conference, and B, with an up-and-coming team like the Lakers that they would have to see in conference over and over again. That's not something that obviously appeals to Greg Popovich and the rest of the Spurs organization that has been one of the perennial powers in that conference for the better part of the last decade plus, better part of the last 2 decades, really. And so with that in mind, that seems to be where all of this centers around for me, is how do we reconcile that with how it affects LeBron? Because it all comes back to, who are the league shifters? LeBron James is going to be a league shifter, and his decision seems largely predicated on what Kawhi can do, because we're hearing more and more people try and go with the line now that as we get closer to this, Cleveland seems like a more and more viable option. And now LeBron James can opt in. We're steadily approaching that date, opt into the last year of his contract, can also sign a one-year deal in Cleveland that would have him with the player option going into next summer, which has been something LeBron James has been a part of for a while now, these short deals that allow him freedom of movement. And one reason that it would seem appealing if he wanted to sign a one-year deal to get to next summer is to try and time this up with Kawhi Leonard free agency. And how calculated you want to believe LeBron James is or is capable of being at this point all hinges on that. And it goes back to the central thesis of NBA free agency, which is we're still trying to figure out the principal motivator for LeBron James. Hell, LeBron's human like the rest of us. For all of us that have contemplated a move for business or personal reasons and otherwise, you have to find a balance that is much more art than science in this equation. And with as many things as he's got to weigh, whether it's legacy, whether it's the finances, whether it's his family's happiness, the opportunities and the future opportunities for his sons, all of these things we're still in the dark on. But what we can see from the outside, and what seems to, from a basketball stance, be the other guy, the other league shifter that can have the most impact on him, it seems to be Kawhi Leonard. That being said, there are other interesting free agents coming into this season, and listening to some of our NBA insiders, reading some of our NBA insiders on .com, it becomes interesting hearing names like Boogie Cousins, Paul George, who we also remember is the other piece in this that seems to have gotten sort of usurped by all the Kawhi Leonard talk. 888-729-3776. If you're an NBA team looking at the rest of free agency, is there one of those guys that does it for you? In non-LeBron free agency, if you can say, my team landed X player, what's actually moving the needle for you? 888-SAY-ESPN. But coming up next, one of our ESPN NBA insiders said there's one team that we should start writing off, one team that will absolutely not be a fit for LeBron James, and we'll tell you why next. It's First and Last here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Going to be the number one question we asked for a while, and I get that people will get sick of this. Hell, I'll probably get sick of LeBron Watch 2018.
I mean, I have no idea at this point.
For me to go to Philly and do it there, he could end up being the greatest player to ever play there and maybe get them a ring or two.
He could end up just staying put and trying it again and seeing how it goes.
I think he's out of Cleveland. He's done what he should do, and the Lakers have done everything, and they've opened up the house.
Today I don't feel like doing anything. I just want to lay in my bed.
We got tweets coming in on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed at ESPN Radio and at M. Golic Jr. 57 as we land ourselves squarely back into NBA free agency. I would say Twitter, but really this is all Magic Johnson's fault. Magic Johnson putting the pinks on the line, says, I don't land a marquee free agent the next 2 years. I'll step down myself. You can book it. That's all he was missing, by the way, of Magic Johnson. Friend of the show. He doesn't know it. We met one time. It was the most starstruck I've ever been. He's much taller than anticipated. He's every bit of what you'd expect and then more. But most starstruck I've ever been, guy who's a friend of the show in a roundabout way because we have met one point in time. I've dubbed that status on him. But if he listened to the show, he would know if he just said book it at the end of all that, he'd have himself a real scorcher of a take. Now, he has reignited all this conversation about not only LeBron James, but Kawhi Leonard and how those two in particular seem to shape what's going on. And what's been interesting is how now forgotten Paul George feels in this conversation. How he almost feels like the ace in the hole for what the Lakers have going on, since we've been doing that dance since last summer when he told the Pacers, I'm going to leave you for the Lakers in free agency. Do whatever you will with that information, but I am going to leave there. And it seemed to be a foregone conclusion since then. So much so that now we've got Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James hanging in the balance. I think we've really downgraded interest. And Blake Stan Stewart points out on the 1-800-Flowers.com Twitter feed, we talk about Paul George's 3-part series on ESPN and that his decision has been made. And what do you think that decision is? I think it's interesting just because we hear the repetition of that term decision. How it relates to what we saw from LeBron James many moons ago. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio, the ESPN app. Surprise a friend or a loved one with a bouquet from 1-800-Flowers.com. When you order a dozen multicolored roses for only $29.99, you'll get another dozen absolutely free. Go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN. As a side note, John Hayes, who is in producing for us today, normally you hear him down with Paul Feinbaum. That deal from 1-800-Flowers was so good, John puts it up on the screen for me where I'm supposed to read it from, and he goes, I'm not sure if this is right, this is what they gave me, but this is the one up there. John, I mean, it's just too good to be true.
Yeah, I sign me up, Mike. It's too good to be true. $29.99, you serious?
Get right out of town.
Multicolored?
Get right out
Not
of
just
town.
red?
No, not just red, not just all pink, not just all white. No. Multicolored. So a deal so good it actually made our producer question if he was doing his job correctly on this show. That's the 1-800-Flowers difference. You're welcome, Jimmy. Anyway, I thought it was interesting that as we look at free agency and how we address all of this, and maybe it's because we are so LeBron fatigued, but we go back to that first iteration of it when you had the decision being made compared to now where Paul George, I hadn't really even noticed it until I saw that tweet where you scroll down on .com and there is Paul George's journey to free agency. Paul George, My Journey, a 3-part series on ESPN.com chronicling this guy's path to free agency. It's at my own network, and I hadn't really known about it. We hadn't gotten upset about it. We hadn't pointed it out as anything abnormal. But if this was LeBron James doing something like this, I wonder if the villainy would be the same, or if, like a lot of other things in the league, he was the first guy through the wall on something that now we're a little less uncomfortable with. Maybe it's just the overall interest that each player draws. I'm not really sure, but one way or another, I look at this and I say, man, as usual, whether it's been with super teams, whether it's been with guys going their own way and becoming more marquee businessmen off the court, these continue to be trails that LeBron has helped in conjunction with others and guys that have laid the groundwork before him, but really in such a way where now this can fly under the radar, this can be possible with little to no blowback as far as what I've heard. First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Now, as we look at free agency and people have fun crossing names off the list of teams and potential destinations for LeBron James, as we get closer to the deadline and reality starts to be more of the norm, I thought it was interesting that, the Philadelphia 76ers, especially as their deep playoff run started to take shape for a team that we thought was a little further away from their finish line, talked about as one of those teams that might wait out the Golden State Storm. Well, all of a sudden, this team starts to perform well. You've got these great young players in Simmons and Embiid. A team that overperforms a little bit by any stretch of the imagination this season. All of a sudden now, they seem like a place that at least going to draw interest. And, of course, they got in the Billboard sweepstakes. We'll have plenty more on billboards coming up for you on Golic and Wingo later today. But our NBA insider and LeBron James expert, Brian Windhorse, explores the fit for LeBron James and the city of brotherly love and how, well, quite frankly, there may not be one.
I don't think Philadelphia, from a basketball standpoint, is a very good fit at all. I think LeBron is intrigued by them because they have a really interesting team and they have lots of options. And I also think Brett Brown is really well respected by players in the league. But I don't know who's going to shoot the ball. I don't know how it all work. That to me would be fascinating. I'd love to hear from somebody with the Sixers organization to tell me what their pitch is about how they think those players are going to work together.
And that's kind of been the same concern that we've had for a long time when it comes to LeBron James and the Sixers. And yet people have still hammered that home as an option because young core, talented players, add in LeBron James. We just feel like this feels a lot like what I thought the marriage between Chris Paul and James Harden was going to be like in Houston before that proved to be much more multiplication than just addition as far as the quality of that team. I looked at that and said, well, sort of a redundant skill set, a guy that in that offense, especially someone as ball dominant as the eventual MVP James Harden, I wasn't sure how it was going to play, and to the Houston Rockets' credit, it played in a way that has now made them the perceived most viable threat to what Golden State has. They were probably Chris Paul's pulled hamstring away from being a team that we talked about as maybe an NBA champion in the middle of this dynastic run. And so we look at that coupled with now what we've got going on this summer where LeBron James was talked about maybe being linked to Houston still, was talked about maybe being linked to Philadelphia. And as we, in Brian's words, cross Philadelphia, not maybe off the list, but look at them and downgrade because of a basketball fit. It's interesting, the Cavaliers, who so many people seem to be rallying back to at this point, haven't really conducted themselves like a team that's hopeful for a return of the king.
I don't think the Cavs feel really good about their position. And I'm not basing that on anybody telling me. I'm basing that on their actions. Because if you look at their actions for the last 11 months, they are making decisions like they expect LeBron James to leave. And maybe that's smart. Maybe that's setting themselves up to move on and not be in the abyss.
Man, that's the fear, right? That's what I've talked about with Cleveland is I don't really understand why you wouldn't put all your eggs in the LeBron basket because I'm sorry, you can try and operate like the abyss isn't on the other side of his tenure there, and maybe as an organization, that's what you're paid to do is try and field the best team for the realistic outcome. But man, as someone observing on the outside and seeing what the Cavs were before and after this, man, I don't know. 888-729-3776, 888-SAY-ESPN. Get in touch with us in the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. But coming up next, the fired college football coach's office has a unique layout that his replacement isn't overly fond of. We'll break down interior design next. It's First and Last on ESPN Radio.
Now, First and Last. First and Last on ESPN Radio and on the ESPN app.
It's First and Last. Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. As we get ready to break down the finer points of interior design, or some might even say home improvement. I gotta really start with something I noticed as I was traveling a lot in the last week or so, spent a lot of time in airports and spent a lot of time in situations where working in this job, you spend a lot of your time hyper-focused on what the story is going to be, what's going on in the different avenues of sport, and what that might give us, especially during a time like the summer where they're a little more sparse. And consuming more as a casual fan, and I think someone that's not as, reliant on, all right, what's going to be the interesting thing? Where do I go and look at it? I was able to just kind of see, all right, what do you notice walking around in the course of a given day? And I was shocked in transit how much I noticed the World Cup. And because I had heard about television ratings in the U.S. being down for this, people always have this debate about what the interest level is of soccer in America. People always have this conversation, when is the game going to grow? Man, I tell you what, it could just be the strength of the World Cup as an event. It could just be people's desire to be around what's popular. But it jumped off the page everywhere I was. I was in an airport bar Saturday and heard a noticeable roar, like down the terminal, when Germany notched the go-ahead goal late in that game as they faced a very dubious draw or loss. I was watching up and down my own Twitter feed and just the response I saw in public yesterday as we got to see Argentina get a much-needed win and keep themselves alive in this group stage. Messi seeming to get a lot of salvation out of what they were able to pull together. And it just kind of shocked me because I sit around and I was genuinely curious what I would notice as we hear all about these NBA free agency topics that we'll get back into. It is that there was a lot of strength in what was going on in the World Cup, and especially when you've got, and I said this last week as we were able to have the side-by-side comparison because of Messi's struggles compared to what Cristiano Ronaldo had done this tournament. But when you can take, especially in this beginning stage, the two best players in the world and just hand them up on a platter and give us the most base-level sport debate, even with a sport that we may not be as high on overall as a country, or at least that's the story, I think it makes it a lot easier and a lot more digestible and can help draw a lot of people in, and I think it's worked. And certainly Messi doing well works for Argentina. Fernando Palamo, our ESPN international soccer analyst, joined Kenny Mayne on SportsCenter and just talked about the difference when Messi is Messi.
He was clicking on all cylinders from the get-go. Argentina has him and only him to prey on. They've been trying to piece this team together from the very beginning. It's just not a cohesive unit except for the fact that they have Leo Messi. And if he disappears, just as it happened against Croatia, anything can happen with them. And they lost 3-0 in that game. And if he is on the field and is clicking like tonight, well, again, anything can happen. And most of the time, what happens with them, if Messi's on fire, is that they win.
First and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. I mean, that's the only time they win, because if you've watched this Argentina team as extensively as I have, which means you've watched them through the tournament so far as they've struggled, it's not a good Argentinian outfit. And I think by any stretch, when you talk to our soccer analyst, Taylor Twellman, going to be in studio with Golic and Wingo coming up later today, everyone will point to the fact that this isn't a great Argentina soccer outfit and that they are really dragged kicking and screaming by the leg of Messi. But he is compelling for that name. And really the drama around this team right now, because you've got a star player in Messi who has at times looked dejected, the bad body language all-star of this tournament, and then there's the curious relationship between team and manager that Fernando Palamo also talks about.
Ever since Argentina lost in Madrid against Spain in a friendly in March by 6-1 margin, Jorge Sampaoli has been in doubt with many of Argentina's critics, and rumors has it that he's been distancing himself with the rest of the squad, and particularly with Leo Messi. Even though we see pictures of them talking to each other in practice, reality is that very few players on this team trust the guidance of Jorge Sampaoli. And any of the images that we saw in tonight's game, Sampaoli celebrating the goals all by himself, the team celebrating the victory all together and without the presence of the coach, just tells us that there's certain distance between them. So they start as underdogs, even though they have Leo Messi, but they have to put things together. They have a week to do so before they meet next Saturday in Kazan.
And that becomes interesting because the relationship between coach and player, manager and player, whatever sport you use, especially with the star, is always pretty telling about your future with an organization. First and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. That's not even the most interesting thing to happen with Argentina yesterday. Argentinian legend Diego Maradona, who was treated by paramedics at the World Cup. I think they said they looked at low blood pressure, was able to get out of the stadium, so he's fine and everything checks out there. But double birds during the round for somebody in the stadium, catching those hands in a very different light. Big week for the middle finger. Bill Russell and Diego Maradona, two legends in their own right, both just letting it fly, which is a reminder that there is no more satisfying feeling in the world than a good flipping of the bird when the mood does strike you. And especially in the case of Bill Russell, I respect the frequency that he has to be using that. If in a public setting like that he's well-versed in and knows there's going to be cameras and people, that he still couldn't stop himself from the knee-jerk reaction that is elicited just by the mere sight and presence of Charles Barkley. That is just a remarkable testament to his use of the middle finger and Charles's ability to get a response out people. That's why they're the best. That's why they're two of the best. Now, the coaching thing is interesting, too, as we pair it with another football story. And this one, I don't think it's going to make waves in a huge way and probably shouldn't. But at the same time, big-name coach talking about a coach that just got fired is always sort of just outside of that code of conduct amongst the world of coaches that it makes my eyebrows raise up a little bit. Jimbo Fisher, new coach at Texas A&M, $75 million, all fine and good. But it's just sort of that unspoken rule that anytime you're coming in disparaging the staff and the regime that was just in-house, usually not the way to go. And I've been around, I've seen assistants do it for the guy that was going in there, and as a player, I can assure you that is not a way to endear yourself with the people that are currently there. Again, as we talk about that relationship between player and coach. And this is without knowing the relationship that Kevin Sumlin, the former Texas A&M coach, had with his players. This was without knowing the relationship that Jimbo Fisher has with this team already and what the level of buy-in is as that transition takes hold. Again, as someone who's been a part of a coaching change, it's not easy on anybody. It's not something I wish on most teams, even if it's seen as an improvement in the way that Jimbo Fisher might seem to be just from an accomplishment level over what has been going on in College Station prior to that with Kevin Sumlin. It's still not an easy time for anyone. And as a player, as a part of that transition, your identity is forever tied to the staff that brought you over. And so when Jimbo Fisher comes out and says, he's going to be making some changes to Kevin Sumlin's office, said, quote, "It's like a damn nightclub in here. This ain't going to be my office." Said the office had dark carpet and black walls, which doesn't seem to be the vibe that Derek Fisher enjoys. This courtesy of a Sports Day news story. In addition to some change that Jimbo Fisher has already made, he got rid of the music at practices. He made, retooled the practices and made them tougher. It's a coach coming in and understandably setting a tone. We see this all the time. Coaches come in and change practice, and they want to grind guys out, and they want to set a new standard without saying, we want to improve on what the prior regime did. It's just sort of the unspoken part of this. You understand that other regime didn't lose their job because they were doing a great job. But to come in and to even bring up the name or bring up this comparison in a small way, and I understand it shouldn't reverberate through the vacuum of college football and cause any major waves, but it's just enough to let you go, okay, there's already a little bit of friction here. There's already a little bit of comparison to the old regime, and you just file it away, put it in the back, put it in your memory, and see if it starts to become a trend, and see if this is something that comes up more often than not, especially if there's any friction that arises once you get to actual football. If you get to fall camp and all of a sudden it turns into comments that move on the field, if that's an area that still is off limits here, or if that taboo is removed, if this is a gateway to more conversation here. Again, not time to sound the alarm, but time to put a reminder in there as we get ready to move through this transition. 888-729-3776. Get in touch with us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Coming up next, we'll have a friend join us on that Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. A ton going on in the world of New York sports right now. and none of it very good. Gordon Damer of 98.7 ESPN New York going to join us next. It's First and Last here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. The cross-section between real-life news, between issues, serious issues, whether they've been political, whether they've been serious crimes, and their intersection with sports is always a strange and dicey territory for us here who are in the business of 24-hour sports coverage. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. And anytime real life comes and smacks us in the face, it's a reminder that sports is not recused from these issues. It's a reminder that sports is not recused from the things that go on and affect everyone else. And quite frankly, the opposite, it seems impossible to avoid because sports is just the heightened version of everything that we experience in life. So we've got a lot of news in the real life realm and a lot of it hitting home right here close to us in New York. And so to do that, we enlist a little bit of help from our friend Gordon Damer of ESPN 98.7 in New York, joining us in the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. We're brought to you by Pennzoil Synthetics, taking synthetic motor oil performance to a whole new level. Make the switch to Pennzoil Synthetics today. And Gordon, I appreciate you joining us this morning. And I feel like there's no other place I can start right now other than to kind of get a reaction of what it's like in New York right now, especially around the Giants with the news. Janoris Jenkins, yesterday, police investigating the discovery of a body at his home in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. He's been, in West Palm Beach in Florida. He hasn't been around, but the body discovered there, it's being treated as a homicide investigation. What, if anything, have you heard around this in New York about what is kind of the temperature here?
Well, it's still very early on, and obviously the police are not giving out many details on it right now, so it's kind of hard to know what's really going on. But obviously, as you said, Mike, it's one of those stories, in sports, you kind of, when you follow sports, when you're a fan of sports, there are certain stories that not necessarily you see coming, but they're a normal course of action, right? A guy gets hurt. There's ways that bad news gets delivered sometimes. And then there's times like that story with Janoris Jenkins where it's something that's completely out of left field that you don't expect coming. So you have to kind of tread a little lightly when you don't know what really the details are as of yet. But obviously yesterday when you see that story and you see the news, it's something shocking. And it's something you kind of keep an eye on, but you kind of just hope for the best for the family as well until you really know all the details on it.
Yeah, so I would say supposedly a family friend who had been living at the house is the victim in this case, and Janoris Jenkins, who was going to get on a plane to come back to New Jersey to address all this, now staying in West Palm at the urging of both his lawyers and the team's lawyers. And I'm interested, too, from that perspective, Gordon, as we look at a Giants franchise that for so long has prided itself on being one of the cornerstone franchises of the NFL and this pinnacle of doing things the right way. Really, the last couple of years, in a lot of different regards, and obviously not lumping this into it, but this is another headline that I'm sure as an organization they don't want to deal with after having to deal with a lot of other very public showings, really mostly centered around Odell Beckham Jr. What's your read on this Giants franchise now as we're getting more noise out of there than we're really accustomed to?
Yeah, and this one certainly is an unusual one, right? I mean, this is not something, and you have to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the organization who is probably trying to get their own information on it, and in an environment where information is probably not readily available. So I'm sure that they're doing their due diligence behind the scenes, trying to find out what's going on for themselves. But it's a very tough situation considering, again, as I said, this is not something that teams are used to dealing with this on a kind of routine basis. This is not something year in and year out where you deal with stories like this. So it makes it just kind of hard to see what the path forward is for the team and how they end up dealing with the situation.
First and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Gordon Damer of ESPN's 98.7 New York joining us in the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line, taking over for us at the top of the hour here. And I guess switching gears now because, again, we'll wait as more information presents itself on that story. And we look at what's going on in the Diamond last night. Luis Severino, another stellar night for the Yankees. The Mets get a win in walk-off fashion. And it feels like we're always talking about pitching in some vein or another in New York. I look at .com this morning and I see real or not, the Brewers need to trade for Jacob deGrom. And that seems to be the name that keeps coming up for the Mets. How realistic at this point does it seem to you that the Mets would actually consider parting ways with Jacob deGrom at this point?
Well, Mike, I've been saying for a while, considering with the Mets, it feels like so many of their decisions, especially since the Wilpons and the whole Bernie Madoff thing kind of went down, all their decisions, it feels like, have some angle where it's based on the money, right? Like it always feels like the team, they're picking up Jose Reyes because he's making no money. He's not productive anymore, but they continue and they bring him back even though he's not making any money. So I don't think that it's very realistic when you consider that Jacob deGrom is still under team control for another couple of years, and that's what every team is looking for, young, controllable starting pitching at a high level. I didn't think it was very realistic at all to think that the Mets would be thinking really seriously about trading deGrom, but then you get the news yesterday that Sandy Alderson is stepping away and probably stepping away for good as he has a recurrence of his cancer treatments and he's going to need surgery. The uncertainty now in that Met front office with whoever takes the job long term, I find it very hard to believe that the organization would be doing the right thing by making a decision on something as big as trading this piece that they have, this one shining, glimmering hope that they have in this lost season when there's so much uncertainty surrounding the organization right now.
Yeah, and the Mets, speaking of that decision of Sandy Alderson to take his leave of absence to get treated for cancer, the Mets, in their walk-off win, dedicated it to Sandy Alderson, and so everyone certainly wishes him all the best as he continues to attack that situation as it recurs again. But just hearing you say that, Gordon, we're talking to Gordon Damer, 98.7 ESPN in New York, about this idea that in New York right now, the young, quality, shining pieces always seem to be talked about in getting shopped, whether it's been Kristaps Porzingis of the Knicks for the last season or so now, and his name continually being brought up as something that was movable towards the end of the Phil Jackson tenure there, whether you look at football, and I brought him up before, but what's going on with Odell Beckham Jr. this entire offseason and just how serious those trade topics got, it doesn't really seem like being a star in New York is all it's cracked up to be anymore.
Yeah, so you better keep winning those games, Luis Severino, because if you slip off just a little bit, we'll be calling for... No, nobody's getting traded Luis Severino anytime soon. But look, I mean, it really does... the other part that you have to look at with the Mets, considering all the other decisions they made this past offseason, now look, these were Sandy Alderson moves. Other people in the organization, I'm sure, had a hand in it as well. But when you take a look at the decision-making that they've done and how poor the decision-making has been, why would you trust anybody in the current regime to be making any other decisions, especially as one as big as possibly trading Jacob deGrom?
Absolutely. Great stuff, as always. You can check him out, 98.7 ESPN New York, coming up in just a few minutes. Gordon Damer, we really appreciate the time, Gordon. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
That is Gordon Damer joining us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. You can get in touch with us on that line, 888-729-3776. You got an NBA free agent that you're after. If you've got any tips on where LeBron James might end up or any of the above. But coming up next, it's 5 o'clock. It's a big day yesterday with a little bit of footy and some big news surrounding a marquee NFL running back who may be finally close to making a deal. That's next. It's First and Last here with Mike Golic Jr. on ESPN Radio and available everywhere on the ESPN app.
Now, First and Last. First and Last on ESPN Radio and on the ESPN app.
So elation for Argentina, and I think for the neutrals as well. They're happy to see this guy still in the tournament.
And then you look at that ball. Messi brings it down in the box. Messi, goal! Argentina wins!
The key thing is Messi displaying leadership tendencies in this game. At halftime, he had him in a huddle. We didn't see that in the first two games.
Right side, Mercado somewhat free. Looks to cross, does. Inside shot, goal! Argentina's out!
Those calls, courtesy of Fox Sports. First and last, Michael Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We're presented by Progressive Insurance. Callers join us on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. That's 888-729-3776. You can also tweet the show on the 100flowers.com Twitter feed at ESPN Radio and at Golic Jr. 57. And I have been not necessarily amazed, but surprised. And I think this is a reminder of where we're at. The World Cup has been spectacular so far. I forget the exact game yesterday, but we had our first 0-0 draw of the World Cup take place yesterday. And we are already almost through the group stage here. For those who say that the sport doesn't score enough for their American tastes or anything and the like, I've been so interested because as we've watched and we heard there, Argentina and Lionel Messi, one of the best players in the world, finally having his moment, finally getting not only the goal that helped lift them or give them the early lead in that game, but has already been a part of the conversation for a number of reasons that we'll certainly get into. We've had that side by side with Cristiano Ronaldo's success so far. We've had some early struggles from some world powers. But more than anything, I just think we've seen a lot of that genuine buzz. I've been traveling so much in the last week that being in transit and being out in a lot of, bars and sports bars and restaurants and going through airports and just seeing the way people have been responding to what's gone on. I was in an airport bar on Saturday for that beauty of a go-ahead goal in the Germany match, and hearing a whole group of people erupt in that setting to me was jarring, but it was a reminder that as we read things, I saw on Bloomberg News that the World Cup TV ratings in the U.S. are down 44% from the last World Cup, and that seems jarring, but when you couple in the fact that, all right, yeah, the U.S. isn't in this, and we've had a lot that's changed in the way that we consume media, television, and the like, since that time period, that the interest can still be there, even though it might be coming in different forms now than it was before. And there still seems to be plenty of it, and that's why we added to our renowned Football at 5, which is now morphed into some Football at 5 in honor of the World Cup. And so we had our British friend Liam voice the sounder, and this is what it goes like.
It's 5 o'clock. Do you know where your football is? It's 5 o'clock. Do you know where your football is?
We have Liam's dulcet British tones. We have Alexander Ovechkin's bearish Russian yell. And then just some good old-fashioned football crunching noises. We've really, we've brought football down to our level here at First and Last, which is about all we can ask for. That we said, we've gotten about all we can ask for out of this tournament so far. And in my eyes, it's been really compelling stuff. And to finally see, you heard it coming back from break, but to hear we saw finally those leadership abilities and those qualities demonstrated from Messi. I know we identify Cristiano Ronaldo's physical prowess with LeBron James so much as we make those comparisons to kind of help spoon feed it for us, but I see so much of what LeBron's struggles and frustrations tend to be with his team with what Messi's dealing with in Argentina. This is not a good Argentina team in the World Cup this year. This is an Argentina squad that's frustrated with its coach, and this is an Argentinian star in Messi who seems frustrated with his team, and the body language through the course of the first few matches has reflected that. But to finally see this and to finally see the way his team responded, it's no shocker. Fernando Palamo, our ESPN international soccer analyst.
He was clicking on all cylinders from the get-go. Argentina has him and only him to prey on. They've been trying to piece this team together from the very beginning. It's just not a cohesive unit except for the fact that they have Leo Messi. And if he disappears, just as it happened against Croatia, anything can happen with them. And they lost 3-0 in that game. And if he is on the field and is clicking like tonight, well, again, anything can happen. And most of the time, what happens with them, if Messi's on fire, is that they win.
First and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. And unfortunately, it's got to be that simple for Argentina. For a few other world powers, not quite as simple going into the later stages of this group round. So 3 teams currently with the longest active streaks of reaching the knockout stage in Germany, Brazil, and Mexico are all going to enter today's matches without yet clinching a spot in the round of 16. We have got some of the major powers in this tournament on the brink of elimination. So for Mexico and Brazil, Mexico, who has maybe authored already their most historic World Cup win, Taylor Twellman, again, who's coming up on Golic and Wingo, said the other day, simpler path for them, a win or a draw, and they make it through to the round of 16. But for Germany, a team who we saw author that great late game win just this last Saturday, a German team who suffered a very humbling defeat earlier, has a little bit more of a difficult road. They have to beat South Korea, and after that, hope for a Sweden draw or loss to Mexico that would help put them through. They can also advance if Sweden wins, so long as the Germans win by a larger margin than the Swedes. Germany has never failed to advance out of its group at the World Cup. So a lot of stuff on the line today in the world of the World Cup. Look forward to checking that out. Again, I'm telling you, this is as activated as I've seen people around this event. There's been a lot of great drama for this. I mean, God, you've got all-time legends like Diego Maradona openly giving people the middle finger at this thing. It is compelling theater for everyone involved. First and last, here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. But we do, speaking of compelling theater and interesting characters, have some compelling theater and interesting news from the world of traditional American football.
It's 5 o'clock. Do you know where your football is? It's 5 o'clock. Do you know where your football is?
I just look for more excuses to play that Ovechkin yell. But really, I think interesting that this is being talked about, especially from the side that it's coming from. Le'Veon Bell, Steelers all-world running back, recently voted the number 5 player in the NFL's top 100 list that comes out every year, voting system comprised of the current players, came out and talked about the pursuit of his new contract. Le'Veon Bell, who faces being franchise tagged yet again, has made his displeasure with that noted, said obviously the people in the organization try and do what's best for them, and I'm trying to do what's best for me. We're working on it. We're a lot closer than we were last year at this time. That's what I'm happy about. None of it matters if we don't get it done. Hopefully we'll try and get something done. That's what I'm looking forward to. I have confidence that we'll get it done. I want to do it. Our panel of NFL insiders, Bill Polian, Jeff Darlington, and Wendy Nix yesterday talking about the possibility of this actually happening.
There's room there to if you can agree on those parameters, there is room to make a long-term deal. There's at least a framework to make a long-term deal.
From the football perspective, how integral is he to what they do? I mean, it's almost silly to ask the question because you know the answer.
But I do think he's a game changer with what he's able to do at the line of scrimmage, the patience that he shows to be able to let the hole open and then hit it like no other running back. Really, gosh, I can't remember anybody playing like that. But so, yes, he is a game changer, just like Antonio Brown is a game changer. This team, as Bill just alluded to, has the pieces in place to make a championship run based alone on their skills position on offense. So I think absolutely you've got to get these guys in the door and keep them happy. And at this point, it appears that this year it's going down that road, which is a great sign for Steelers fans.
First and last, Mike Golic Jr. We're presented by Progressive Insurance. Small business protection just got easier with more than 30 coverage options available. Progressive has you covered. More at progressivecommercial.com. And I think even more so than the Steelers championship window now, because in my mind, that's much more predicated on Ben Roethlisberger and his continued ability to perform at this point. Because when you've got added weapons like a Juju Smith-Schuster who came on and made the loss of Martavis Bryant something the Steelers were willing to tolerate, you've got a quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger who now, especially after the Steelers go out and draft Mason Rudolph, in the third round, seems more keen on sticking around. But it's how long does his performance dictate this current window? It's Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown that dictate how long that window extends in the future, maybe past what Ben Roethlisberger can afford you. Because the reason we're having this conversation around Le'Veon Bell is he's still young enough to where we look at the tread on the tires and say that's not enough for us to be scared yet as a running back. And as far as the price tag that goes along with it, the NFL and the currency of the NFL in the future will continue to be versatile offensive weapons that can exploit the middle of the field, that can do more than one thing. And usually the do more mantra is emblematic of guys in the back end of the roster, not of the best player on your team who just happens to be the most versatile piece that you've got. So locking that up for the long term, for what he can do for you in the here and now, to me has always seemed like a no-brainer. But we'll have to make sure that the number is right. 888-729-3776, 888-SAY-ESPN. But coming up next, Magic Johnson gives himself an ultimatum heading into next summer. We'll hear from the NBA Hall of Famer. Plus, if LeBron James does land in L.A., where does he rank among the all-time Laker greats already? My God, it is truly the summer book. That's next. It's First and Last here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. A debate I had during the break that was way more interesting than I thought it was going to be on the surface. I heard the phrase, if LeBron James put on a Lakers jersey right now, where would he rank among the all-time Laker greats? And I immediately went, even for me, who was willing to come out here and throw pretty much anything at the wall once we hit the month of June and let it stick. Even I was like, no, we've gone too far. Science. Has science gone too far? My column. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. And I give a testament to John Hayes, who is working with us today. Normally you hear him on the Paul Feinbaum show, and I shouldn't be surprised because Paul, man, this is what you get. This is your wheelhouse down there. You guys know how to stir the pot with the best of them, and it ends up becoming very interesting. So to scene set here a little bit, we've got Magic Johnson coming out and making some very frank comments about the state of this Lakers organization and the way he views his job as they head into the all-important next couple of summers in Los Angeles.
Next summer, if nobody comes and I'm still sitting here like this, then it's a failure. But if you judge us on one summer, that's ridiculous. Then a lot of dudes shouldn't be in their roles. I mean, because if we're banking on one summer for the Lakers, we're in trouble. Right? We're in trouble because you have to give us time. This class, like I told you before I took the job and when I took the job, it's going to be a 2-summer thing for the Lakers. This summer and next summer. And that's it. And then if I can't deliver, I'm going to step down myself. She won't have to fire me. I'll step away from it, because then I can't do this job.
It's time for Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, no contracts. And so we hear that from Magic Johnson, and we understand that that's pointed not only at the idea that LeBron James is someone they're going to pursue and pursue vigorously, but also that Kawhi Leonard could maybe not be in play till next summer since he's still under contract and would need to force a trade with San Antonio. That you're going to see other names. I know that Klay Thompson is one that comes up for next summer, Jimmy Butler, a number of other guys that are going to come up. And so you've got this window, but it all centers around LeBron James. There's only really 2 or 3 players in this league who, by just the nature of their moving, shifts the entire balance of the league. Shifts the entire balance of any franchise they enter. And that's why the Lakers franchise argument is so different, because all of a sudden during the break, I find myself having this argument with our producer, John Hayes, about LeBron James. Immediately as he dons the Laker jersey, where does he rank? And I think I saw this on .com or somewhere. Where does he rank among all-time Laker greats already? And the question seems like a farce up front, because you look at the guys that have worn the Laker uniform, and especially the way the NBA tended to wear it for a very long time, and you say there's no way his accomplishment can stack up. But going out there, to me, and this is, I think, where John and I found ourselves disagreeing, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, LeBron James going out to Los Angeles, to me, if the opportunity is there, is more just a means to an end than I think him really wanting to ingratiate himself into this franchise's history.
Well, and LeBron's never been to a franchise that's bigger than himself. The Los Angeles Lakers they are NBA royalty. LeBron James himself is, yes. Cleveland, no. He turned that franchise into something.
Is
Miami? No.
Is that true, though? Is any one franchise at this point bigger than LeBron James? As great as we think, the Lakers and the Celtics are, when we look at the NBA, it's as star-driven a league as there's ever been, as a star-driven a league as exists in sports, where we talk about names like Jordan, like Kareem, like Wilt, above everything else. Is there really a franchise that's still above LeBron James at this point?
The Lakers stick out to me because of the three-peat with Shaq and Kobe. That's recent memory. That's happened. The Lakers, you walk into that facility, and there's just championship trophy after championship trophy. It's NBA royalty, that franchise.
It is, and you know what? Kobe Bryant reinserting himself into the conversation lately the way that he has, Magic Johnson and company, he was asked if he would be a part of reaching out to free agents. He wouldn't sit in on meetings, but he would make calls. And just his whole insertion back into this conversation is, I think, him trying to remind everyone certainly of his own legacy, but of what it means to be a Laker, of the importance that this franchise has, of the importance of those colors at a time where right now, because if LeBron James goes there, he's just using them, in my mind, right? Like, he's not going there with an understanding or a desire to really fit into that group, because LeBron James' legacy is something that's so secure already, right? Like, this, after last season, I learned all I need to know about the way that we're going to perceive LeBron James going forward, where getting swept in the finals didn't matter because of the run leading up to it. You can't touch this guy anymore.
No, and Paul George, another guy who's on the market, he's a better fit because he has ties to that city. He's a Southern California guy. He wants to be a Laker, to be a part of that franchise. I think if LeBron goes out to Los Angeles, it's going to be an egomaniac tug of war. Think about it that way. You've got Magic Johnson running the team with LeBron James running the point. It's tough for two guys like that to work together.
It's tough, but I don't think it's impossible, especially I don't know, just based on the nature of the personalities of both. Magic Johnson, outside of a few instances, we haven't heard from as much throughout this process as you'd expect someone with that kind of clout in that organization to. I would argue we've heard more pointed comments from Kobe Bryant during this tenure than we've heard from Magic Johnson. Up until now, Magic learning, and again, maybe the guy who is used to being on some of the sports talk mediums, he threw the take out there, and it's already sticking, and we're running with it.
And Kobe, he's not going to stay quiet throughout this if LeBron lands in L.A.
Oh, no, I was going to say, he'll be the first one to reach out, and there'll be a tweet about wrapping his arms around and helping him understand what it means to be a Laker, and then just reminding us, oh, by the way, I've got 5 rings. I don't know if you guys remember this in this whole conversation or not, but I got 5 rings. By the way, check out Detail on ESPN+. Great stuff. Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable 4G LTE networks. But as we look at the realistic options in the here and now for LeBron James, one of our NBA insiders is going to tell you one that makes no sense and one that's starting to gain a little more traction the closer we get to the finish line. That's next. It's First and Last here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.
Life in the fast lane, moving at the speed of life, and I can't slow down. Only got a gallon in the gas tank.
There's a trade in Los Angeles yesterday that shook me to the core. Like, really rattled me personally. I didn't expect to respond to this news like this, but all of a sudden the sinking feeling crept in as I saw it yesterday. The most Uncle Phil memes I had seen outside of a Father's Day in I don't know how long. It's First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app as we sit camped out firmly in LeBron watch, and so much of the conversation is going to center around what Magic Johnson said the other day about free agency, both this summer and next, as the stakes just get raised even more. We had another instance of a family affair in the NBA gone wrong. So we saw Mikal Bridges the other day, united with his mother for a moment in time as the 76ers draft him, only to watch the rights traded away to the Phoenix Suns. The 76ers, where his mother is also an employee in the HR department. They're interviewed on TV together. Life is great. We're all embracing this family moment. And then minutes later, he's traded to the Suns. Villanova star, you're going to keep the same locker, all this, that, and the other. Now you play for the Suns. And so that moment ended pretty quickly before we could really cement that bond in that work setting. Different story with the Clippers in Los Angeles. We had been seeing Doc and Austin Rivers together for a while. Amin El-Hassan, one of our NBA insiders here at the Worldwide Leader, has famously diagrammed the Doc Rivers player acquisition chart. And we'll remember Doc Rivers, who was formerly in charge of personnel moves, essentially was that coach and general manager for the Clippers, has now relinquished those GM-style duties before this move was made. Usually the MO was, have you either played for Doc Rivers in the past or are related to Doc Rivers? Well, congratulations, you are now a Clipper. That was Amin's whole bit. Want to give him full credit on that. That appears to no longer be the case, as Austin Rivers is traded to the Washington Wizards for, was it Marcin Gortat? In a trade there that sends the big man to Los Angeles and sends Austin Rivers packing. Got to be a tough moment at dinner for the Rivers family there. Dad can at least say my hands are tied on this, but it made me curious this morning if my badge was still going to work coming into work. Hate for Golic and Wingo, which we bring up to every Monday through Friday, 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern, all of a sudden announce a trade for me to the Lebitard show, Spain and Fitz, the Will Kane show. I mean, all viable suitors at this point. I shudder to think of what my trade value would look like at this point. There's a lot of jokes in there that I'm going to let you guys make at ESPN Radio and at MGolic Jr. 57 and not going to make at the expense of myself. Now, first and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app for now. We'll see how the day shakes out. I take nothing for granted. I take the undrafted free agent mentality into every day, which is if I walk into this building and I don't get fired or traded, I consider it a great day. That being said, the stakes and the expectations are a little higher in Los Angeles and a little bit higher on the other side of the towns. No disrespect to Clip City, but the Lakers have had the run of the place for a while, and when Magic Johnson comes out and puts down an ultimatum like this, people tend to listen and people tend to take note, talking about the next 2 summers of free agency.
Next summer, if nobody comes and I'm still sitting here like this, then it's a failure. But if you judge us on 1 summer, that's ridiculous. Then a lot of dudes shouldn't be in their roles. I mean, because if we're banking on 1 summer for the Lakers, we're in trouble, right? We're in trouble because you have to give us time. This class, like I told you before I took the job and when I took the job, it's going to be a 2-summer thing for the Lakers. This summer and next summer. And that's it. And then if I can't deliver, I'm going to step down myself. She won't have to fire me. I'll step away from it, because then I can't do this job.
First and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. And so this becomes interesting. Magic Johnson, guy who a lot of people had questions about in this role coming into his time with the Lakers, but the appeal always was, well, he'd be able to get you at least in the door with marquee free agents. It's a lot of what we've heard with Jeff Fizdale in New York with the Knicks. I've heard Stephen A. Smith say it time and time again. Fizdale is going to get you a meeting with those star players because he's got that kind of clout within the league, within the players. Magic Johnson, certainly that guy as well. Big personality. Ton of relationships. That's why he got in that little bit of tampering trouble not too long ago. The kind of guy he is. But now as we try and figure out, all right, what does this mean? Why does lumping in next summer matter so much? And we can take it as face value as it's just Magic, quite frankly, buying himself some time, hedging bets a little bit. As this summer, LeBron James and Kawhi Leonard seem to be not only the most talked about, but really so much so that it's made them forget that the ace in the hole that we've expected for Los Angeles the entire time has really been Paul George. Paul George, going back to last summer before he was traded to Oklahoma City, basically told them in not so many words, I'm leaving for Los Angeles when I'm a free agent. You can stick around for another year of this if you want, or you can just let me go and try and get something in return for it. They did, and Victor Oladipo actually ended up working out pretty well on that one. The NBA's most improved player at the award show the other night, which, God, that award show story for another day. Crowning James Harden the MVP how long after the regular season? Really good job on that one. Was trying to give the NBA a free tip on that one. I saw they did mentioned something that I brought up on Golic and Wingo the other day, which is the idea of moving around the dates of the draft and free agency, the free agent period, and flip-flopping them. The Houston Rockets, I believe, leading the charge on that, because I said if you value the NBA draft as a product, as an entertainment point of your offseason, putting it before marquee free agency really hits and takes hold, kind of neuters the whole thing. And as good a production as the draft is, and as much of it as I watch, you understand that as you go through it, the real movers and shakers of the offseason are still coming up, these heavy hitters that we're getting ready to talk about. Now, as far as what Magic Johnson was talking about, Kurt Sandoval of ABC 7 in Los Angeles sort of cracked the code on what Magic is actually hinting at here.
When he makes that comment, here's what he means by that. They're all in on hoping to get Paul George and LeBron James this summer. But LeBron could sign a one-year deal, and it could be about next summer. What most people think that means, myself included, is if they don't land LeBron, there's a lot of free agents out there next summer. Kawhi Leonard, if he doesn't get a trade, is a free agent after next summer. Klay Thompson, who went to Santa Margarita High School out here, and obviously Klay's father is part of the Lakers organization. Those two guys, and just the future development of Kyle Kuzma and Lonzo Ball and their draft picks, are they a contender? I don't think so in the West, but they're a playoff team for sure.
First and last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio. We're presented by Progressive Home Insurance. Getting a quote is easier than ever. And, God, speaking of homes, we're going to look for clues in just about everything that LeBron and a lot of these marquee free agents do. We've got more billboard talk than I could ever imagine, and I think that's actually coming up more on Golic and Wingo later this morning. A unique method deployed to try and get LeBron James in the door. But we heard it mentioned there, the Lakers' young core, the Sixers' young core, all that these different teams have to offer. And fit kind of gets thrown out the window with LeBron James just because, especially after this year, we kind of assume, all right, if you can take those guys to the finals, everything else is going to be a step up. And you look at all these teams and you wonder who's going to have enough shooters around LeBron James to space it the right way. Maybe it doesn't matter. I looked at what the Rockets were going to do with Chris Paul last summer, and I said, you're bringing in kind of a redundant skill set for a team that's already got an MVP caliber player in James Harden, and yet that ended up being much more multiplication than addition when it came to the added value from Chris Paul being there. So much so that him being off the court towards the end of that series really, in a lot of minds, ended up being the difference between the Rockets going on and probably winning an NBA title versus losing in the Western Conference Finals to the Golden State dynasty that had formed. But for LeBron James, fit, everything else, legacy that all seems secure, it brought up an interesting question earlier, specifically with this Lakers franchise, which is the added weight that comes with a franchise as historically great as Los Angeles. Do these things matter to LeBron James? Are any of those surrounding circumstances, we try and chip away at what makes people tick, because free agency really is a measure of what makes guys tick. I've heard this debate on plenty of other shows. Spain and Fitz the other night I was listening to. Money, circumstance, teammates, what are all these things that dictated for you? And it's different for everyone. And we read the situation, but when it comes to where we're going, which is an all-time great, maybe choosing to link up with an all-time great franchise, it made me think, and I wondered aloud, 888-729-3776, are we going to a place now where, especially in the NBA, where the single stars can mean so much, and we've talked about markets not having the allure that they once did, do these proud franchises like the Lakers and the Celtics, and I think of those at the top of the heap, do their legacies survive and still exceed the top players? Are these organizations, are these teams still better than the individual players that comprise them? Because I look at LeBron James and the Lakers, and we had the debate about him going there. How does it jive with his perception of himself versus the way the Lakers as an organization perceive themselves, the history, the clout that organization has? And in my mind, LeBron James already exceeding that. LeBron James is going to go down as either the best or the second best player to ever play basketball. And in a sport that is so built on individual star power, the Jordans, the Kareems, the Wilts, all these names that we're so used to hearing that go by one word, that to me supersedes anything one team can do, even one team as great as the Lakers, especially now, where more than ever the players are the brand. So along a long enough timeline, do we lose some of that team identity versus the value that these individual players add? We're seeing it play out right now. 888-729-3776. Because coming up next, we've got all that going on, and we forgot about still the one player that may be more important than any other this offseason. That's next. It's First and Last here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. First and Last, Mike Golic Jr. here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. We take you up to Golic and Wingo every Monday through Friday. They're there 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Great guest list for you guys this morning. Field Yates going to come in and hopefully give us an update on what's going on with Le'Veon Bell and his contract situation, the latest news and notes on this bizarre situation involving Janoris Jenkins, a body turning up at his place in New Jersey, Janoris Jenkins, while he is in West Palm Beach, Florida, and the questions that surround that situation. Taylor Twellman, our ESPN soccer analyst, going to help us break down Argentina's major win yesterday, what's at stake for the likes of Germany, Brazil, and Mexico today as we are on the cusp of heading to the knockout stage, and Bulls draft pick Wendell Carter Jr. going to join the guys as he gets ready to take the helm of another one of the historic NBA franchises, as we've been talking this morning about the Lakers news from Magic Johnson, as we've been talking about what the future might hold for a union between the best player in the sport and one of the historic franchises in the sport, and what those things all mean. It's compelling stuff, and I get to go back over and check on Dad and Trey, make sure they haven't broken the place while I'm gone. I mentioned Austin Rivers got traded the other day, so I was a little nervous coming into the building this morning that Dad might do something crazy, that he might think all of a sudden he doesn't need me anymore. Well, Dad, I think anyone could tell you that would be a rash decision, and put down the cell phone right now, all right? I see him out in the hallway. He's holding the cell phone up. It looks kind of menacing. I don't know who he's talking to, and I'm starting to get nervous. So before this goes a little bit too far and I have to break some strange news on air, let's just hit the music. All right, John Hayes filling in for Allie with us today. You guys hear him on the Paul Feinbaum show. Paul, a lot more tame this morning. We don't have quite the raucous group of callers that you guys are used to.
Phil Tremolga, she didn't check in this morning.
It's a shame. We'll look for coming up here soon. But what do we got going on here today, John?
Okay, so if Magic doesn't land LeBron, do you believe him for a second that maybe he would step down? He's not good enough for the job?
Heard it from the man himself yesterday. Magic Johnson, president of basketball operation for the Lakers, putting it on wax, saying that next summer, this is the ultimatum.
Next summer, if nobody comes and I'm still sitting here like this, then it's a failure. But if you judge us on one summer, that's ridiculous. Then a lot of dudes shouldn't be in their roles. I mean, because if we're banking on one summer for the Lakers, we're in trouble, right? We're in trouble because you have to give us time. This class, like I told you before I took the job and when I took the job, it's going to be a 2-summer thing for the Lakers. This summer and next summer. And that's it. And then if I can't deliver, I'm going to step down myself. She won't have to fire me. I'll step away from it, because then I can't do this job.
Yeah, I mean, we hear this all the time in the world of sports. No one ever actually steps away. I love we always keep track, too, of when someone says, like, I would step down, I would quit, I would do all that. And they're always there past that date. But for the Lakers, it's much more about, I think, this kind of flex window now that Kawhi Leonard's future and now that we know the Spurs have been rejecting the Lakers' advances at every turn for Kawhi's. All right, we may have to play this out a little while longer, and maybe that affects the way LeBron James plays this out as well.
Speaking of Kawhi, would you rather have Paul George or Kawhi Leonard on your team for the next 3 years?
For the next 3 years? I mean, The factor, I guess, in this one is Kawhi Leonard's health and mental state that makes this even a fair playing field, because on their best days, one doesn't even come close to comparing to the other as far as quality, even though he's got a sweet nickname like Playoff P.
Paul George is a baller. I don't think he's getting enough credit.
Paul George is a baller. It was a lackluster year for him in Oklahoma City, and it makes you wonder how he plays with others at this point.
What happened to everybody else when they left OKC?
MVPs. Got to keep that in mind right now. Oklahoma City, although those were OKC draft picks, that organization drafts remarkably well. 3 MVPs drafted in consecutive years in Oklahoma City, and they let them all get away. So, Lakers fans, maybe that is your upside here. Paul George has seemed like the slam dunk all along. He's the girl next door. He's been waiting there for you. You're chasing all these, young, attractive free agents like LeBron James, even though he's much older. And all of a sudden, you're going to realize that maybe home was right underneath your nose all along. But I would take Kawhi Leonard to answer the question.
Kawhi Leonard's your player, okay. Jimbo Fisher, does he break an unwritten rule? Whether you're a college football coach or you work in a corporate office. He says Kevin Sumlin's office reminded him of a nightclub. And he's not going to work there. Fair or foul?
To me, it's foul, and I understand it's pretty innocuous content-wise, but just invoking the name of the prior regime in a way that's not just positive, I don't think ever benefits you. And we see this all the time where coaches will comment, so-and-so left the cupboard kind of bare, so we're having to restock and replenish that. In a football sense is always off-putting. But even this, just anything, it's simple rules. Dealing with the media is not hard in my mind, and it's usually just praise for others, criticism for self. And so when it's even something small like this, it makes you wonder just where this goes, as we're at the beginning stage of this transition in his time in College Station.
Poor choice of words.
Correct.
Especially knowing what happened with Johnny Manziel.
Yes.
Down in College Station.
Exactly. A lot of people can read into a lot in that if you're not careful.
Okay. Why would LeBron go to L.A. if he'll never be able to amount to what Kobe was in a Lakers jersey?
Yeah, first and last here on ESPN Radio. We had this debate this morning. LeBron, basically, is he bigger than the Lakers franchise? Will the weight of the ghosts of Los Angeles be enough to keep him away? And I just think at this point, he's sort of Teflon to most of that stuff. The conversations like that we'd be having on a micro level about LeBron James, even a franchise as great as the Lakers, don't really stack up when the only guy we acknowledge at this point that he is chasing is Michael Jordan. And so everything at this point seems to be a means to an end for LeBron James. The question becomes more there, is the means there, is the fit enough to be able to help him get to that point? And more specifically, going back to Kawhi before, is he going to be in play enough to help that cause?
You mentioned Le'Veon Bell, his contract situation, the Steelers, a possible Super Bowl contender if he signs the deal and plays well. Do they have a better chance of winning the Super Bowl this year than the Eagles do of repeating as Super Bowl champions?
I think so, just because repeating is such a difficult prospect. The NFC East is going to look better this year with a healthier Cowboys outfit. Zeke Elliott no longer having that suspension hanging over the top. We'll see what happens with the Giants here. If they can keep Odell on the field, they're a lot more interesting too. So all things to consider as that situation gets a little bit more difficult. Life's going to get more difficult again for Dad and Trey. I go over there and make some noise with them next. It's first and last here on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.